Thank you for coming. Well, I think most, I know a lot of you, so I won't get into too much detail here, but we are the Lake George Land Conservancy, a not-for-profit land trust that protects the Lake George watershed, land in the Lake George watershed. And what would we be without the people that make this community so vibrant? So this year we have a wonderful lineup, and Pete Nelson is going to kick off our Living Lands series with a talk on the birth of the electric age. A little known story right here, close to here, a little bit further north. And so I won't give away too many details, but Pete is a wonderful speaker and activist, and thank you, Pete, for coming as always. Yay! She'd like to take it down.
Thank you for having me. So yeah, first, thanks to the Lake George Land Conservancy and Jewett and Mike Horn. I've got a relationship going with the Lake George Land Conservancy. This is my third or fourth time presenting here. I love doing it. In my activist life, our organization views land trusts, land conservancies as critical to the Adirondack. And I love their whole idea of living lands. And at the end of this, I'll have a word about tying this in. But I love to tell stories. And every time I come here, I try to share a story. I'm a college mathematics guy, but I'm changing my life to be a college historian. So I'm in the middle of a graduate thesis at SUNY Cortland. This is a piece of it. And it's one of the things that inspired me to want to write the thesis I'm writing. And it is a story some know, although the depth and the details, and it's quite remarkable. So, first, there's always the chance that someone in the audience knows more than I do. So we have two questions, which is good. I don't have any ego about that. Sorry, you can be the emitter.
Be the emitter over here in the corner.
Okay. How many people here have ever been to the Penfield Homestead? That's fabulous. Half the audience, that's wonderful. Him at the bottom of the screen. I love those guys. And is anyone in here a physicist or electrical engineer?
All right.
Can you cancel this? Mistake, you just froze on it, okay? That's great. So I want to talk about a piece of Adirondack history that a bit away.
She's I'm guessing an electrical engineer or.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yes.
Great. Wonderful. So this is a piece of Adirondack history that ties into a theme that I have, which you will see revealed in this presentation. A lot of Adirondack history is mythology. And there's the good side to that, but there's a not so good side to that. This is quite a story. I will tell you that. As soon as we admit the next person.
No, we're not allowed in.
Oh, sure they are. But before I do that, I would like to talk about my car. Little digression. So this car is in the parking lot. We drove it here. It's a Chevy Bolt. It's a pure electric car. I'll never go back to a gas car. I'm not here to convince anybody to buy an electric car. I'll just tell you that it's the best thing I've ever owned. And there are some reasons why it's so great. There is the problem of charging it, which for me is not a problem. I charge overnight at my house, but in all respects, the way that it works, it's so sensible. It's kind of breathtaking when you drive an electric car. It is hard to go back because you can feel the difference. So here's a little piece of information about this car. This guy is a professor of automotive engineering. And he has a component that he's got his hands on there. Anybody want to guess what that component is?
Motor.
That's the entire engine. That's it. He can pick it up. That is 226 horsepower of engine that he's got right there. And the motive force inside involves parts that don't actually touch, right? It's never gonna wear out. It doesn't need any maintenance at all. And it's unbelievably powerful. And it also does something that cars want to do, like this, it rotates. So that leads to the next wonderful little slide. That's the entire drive, all the way to the wheels. Ladies and gentlemen. I pay nothing for maintenance on my car, no oil changes, no belts, no hoses, no stuff going like this. That's it, doesn't have a transmission, it's got a couple of gears, that's it. So it's a pretty amazing thing. You're wondering what this has to do with the Adirondack, right, this way. So. Electromagnetism is one of the fundamental forces, it's incredibly powerful. This little motor can do two things, which is very convenient. It can drive the car, right? It produces horsepower, it rotates the wheels, welcome. And it can drive the car, but it also can have its generator. It can go into what's called regen mode. I literally, ladies and gentlemen, don't use my brakes. Except every once in a while in an emergency, or in the first 2 or 3 minutes when the car is warming up, otherwise I never touch the brake, because the engine does it. It's like driving a golf cart, one pedal driving. So there are a lot of really good things about it, whether you choose to buy an electric car or not. I love it. Now, in order to understand what's going on, we need a little physics. No panicking. Everybody relax. We all know about magnets, right? And they have a magnetic field. In this case, we have lines of force that move from north to south. Everybody's seen a horseshoe magnet before. So I'm gonna make some key points, they'll be in purple. The first thing is that magnets exert force, they can move other magnets, right? We all learned that in school. North to north pushes apart, north to south pulls together. Wonderful. There were some discoveries, and I'll talk in more detail about these discoveries. And this isn't physics lecture, so don't panic again. But a discovery that was made, some years ago, we'll say for now, was that if you put current through a wire, it generates a magnetic field. This was quite the discovery. So if I have current going through the wire this way, it generates a magnetic field that goes around the wire that way. Okay, so that's a second key point. So what happens is, since we know that magnets push and pull other magnets, if I had a horseshoe magnet and I had a wire sitting there and I put current through it in this direction, there would be a repelling power that would want to push the wire away from the magnet this direction. You can go on YouTube and see a video of that anytime you like. Okay, so if I apply current, movement. Now I want you to consider two wires that have current going in opposite directions. This one nearer wants to be pushed away. This one further wants to be pulled toward the magnet because the current's going in the other direction. So use a little imagination, ladies and gentlemen. Suppose we put those two guys on a spindle. You know what they want to do? They want to rotate. He's smiling because he's got it. He knows all this. He knew all this years ago. They want to rotate, and what would happen if you did this experiment, if you built this device, it would rotate 180 degrees and it would stop. But it would be at least at 180 degrees rotational motion. So if only you could solve that stopping problem. And you can. So this is what's called a commutator. But basically what it does, we have a battery supplying current. And it hits different sides of this thing, it has a break in it, right? It has a gap. So half the time, this is the positive, this side, and half the time, the other side is the positive, in other words, the current switching. So this wire, that's a loop, wants to rotate 180 degrees, and just when it gets there, the current switches and it wants to rotate again. Holy cow, you have a motor. And you have a motor where this is no friction. It's also many orders of magnitude more powerful than a gas motor. I won't bother to waste your time. So Now I need to figure out how to get this to advance. I'm gonna do it. Come on. Why stop at one loop? If we have one loop, you get a certain amount of force. If you add more loops, you get more force. That's very simplified because there are complexities with that. But this is an early electromagnet. It's a horseshoe piece of iron with wire wrapped all around it. It produces a tremendous amount of force. So, in fact, a diagram of a modern DC motor looks like what you saw before, except that you can see many loops. Okay, sorry. There we go. So that's the next key point. So we're building up these key points. When you wrap lots of wires, you get incredibly powerful force. Then there's a second piece, and this piece changed the world, literally. I mean, building an electromagnet, building an electric motor, very important. This is even more important. And it's sort of the reverse. If I take a wire and move it through a magnetic field, it generates current. That's called magnetic induction. And what it means is if I didn't tap current going to do this, but rotated it through, it would generate current. So you can imagine the same device being an engine at one point and being a generator at another. When it's a generator, there are forces involved, there's loss involved. So if you had this hook to say a car, it would want to slow the car down. So a two-way relationship, ladies and gentlemen, between electricity and magnetism, not known for a long time. We understand it pretty well now. So that's why this car is so simple in one way and so powerful in another. It's what it's got is what you saw. Yes, there's a more sophisticated version, but the science is basically exactly the same. At this point, you got to be asking this, right? Well, before I answer that question, I'm about to. Well, let me say this actually. I tell stories about the Adirondacks. I love them. I'm in love with them. I find them romantic. And some of them are more or less valuable in a larger context. This one's a knock your socks off level valuable, however you take it. It's a really quite an amazing thing. And in order to get to, let me ask another question. You've seen this very cool technology. Anybody have an idea when this was built? The first actual electric car.
Early 1903. 1890s.
Say again.
Like 1895, 77.
Back in the 19th century, this gentleman in the back, is he out of his mind?
No.
No. 1835, ladies and gentlemen. And you'll see why that relates to the Adirondacks shortly. So left this is a little side. What happened? Electric cars were built so far long ago, and they're so amazing. How come we don't all drive electric cars? Anybody else besides you? Because you do need to have a source of electric current, and that's pretty hard to do. So the motor part, the electromagnetic part, we've got that. We've had that for 200 years. But batteries are just now. Take a vehicle and move it down the road, extended period of time. Would you like to admit? I love technology.
You can handle it.
Got it. So now we get to how this has to do with the Adirondacks, and some of you know at least part of the story. 8 years ago, no, actually 9 years ago, my family, who's in the back, by the way, and I moved from Wisconsin to the Adirondacks. I've been coming here all life. But we decided, you know, what the heck? Instead of just going to this place we love, let's just move there. People get a little more conservative when they get older. The heck with that. We sold our stuff, we put our dog out here, and it's been perfect. I took a job, I landed a job, really almost by accident. The last minute, just before moving here, I landed a job at the Ticonderoga campus of North Country Community College. And a few weeks after I started that job as a mathematics professor, I decided to try to find a back route to my home of Keene. We live in Keene. So I'm taking back roads and I got lost. I went on a road, I don't know where it's going. I obviously took a wrong turn. And I saw this sign. And I looked at it, and I'm a math guy, but before that I was a physics guy. I won't explain why I gave up on physics, but I know enough about the history of science to know this is crap. I mean, this is like earthly to electric shows in Europe. That all happened somewhere else. Why do these, I mean, I get trying to promote yourself, that's really cool, but it's nonsense. Yeah, guess what? It ain't. So here's what we have to take a little bit of step back. There is a mythology about the Adirondacks. You all know it. If you live here or if you vacation here, if you've fallen in love with this place as I have, you know this mythology. The untrammeled wilderness, the unexplored wilderness, all the way well into the 19th century. This is a place nobody knew about. This mythology is romantic because it tells us this is an unparalleled wilderness, and it's never really been conquered or developed. It's always been something that had a sense of primeval. It's very, very valuable, and it is romantic. So this sense of history is stuck, and it still sticks to this day. Pick up a copy of the Adirondack Reader. This is the thing that you get from things not only written in the 19th century, but in the 20th century and beyond. And a lot of our land conservation, water conservation decisions, a lot of the protection of wilderness that we developed, all of which I'm for, came out of this romantic tradition. So I don't mean to denigrate it, but I do mean to tell you it ain't true. It's a myth. So here's the mythology in very simple terms that people are exposed to in thinking about Adirondack history. So it isn't a wilderness until human beings, Euro-Americans, start exploring it, which really starts in earnest in the 1830s, 70s, or 70s, and then everybody started working called it. That's the next step, surveying the whole thing. There's some early mining, and then it really expands, logging extends. And as that happens, some of the thinkers who are worried about urbanization are thinking about damage to the environment, right? This nascent idea of ecology, George Perkins is the leader of that. They latch onto this idea of a wild aesthetic. The wilderness isn't something you conquer, it isn't a bad thing. It's a beautiful thing, right? These are romantic transcendentalists, want all of them, right? And they're writing about this in the Adirondacks. And then we get a struggle for a park that ultimately succeeds in remarkable level of production. But here's the actual word. And this is why I'm changing from math history, because I want to explore particularly the red part. First of all, the idea is there's nonsense. We have a growing body of archaeological evidence that indicates what people have known for. Indigenous folks have been here since the Ice Age receded, right? But basically on the tails of receding ice ages. There are arrowheads and Tearsfield by Tupper Lake that are 11,000 years old that have been uncovered. There are signs of agriculture. There are various signs of settlement. The idea that traveled through and didn't stay here is a sort of a Western Euro-American concept, not true, right? And then much more exploration during this era, French and British contending over it. Nobody settled here from Euro-American cultures, but there's a lot of activity. At the end of the French Indian War, the activity exploded. There was speculation throughout the park, lots of settlements, and it was a frontier for Euro-American colonial settlers. And like all frontiers, like the Northwest Territories in the Ohio area, in Illinois, like the West later, it was a place where people pushed hard to find new ways to do things, right? To innovate. And that's what happened here. And so the thesis I'm writing argues that the Adirondack region was a frontier as important to the destiny of the United States as any other frontier, right here. The story I'm in the middle of tonight is part of that. It's only part of that. There are some other big pieces to that, okay? So there's a lot more going on than we like to pretend sometimes. This story is part of that. To get into a little detail, these are all things that happened in that frontier era, from the middle of the 18th century to the middle of the 19th century, and I won't dwell on them because we don't have all night. Definitely an impact on American democracy. part of it caused by land speculation, part of it caused by interactions with Native Americans, particularly the Haudenosaunee, who had some democratic ideas in how they ran things and how their cultures operated and made political decisions. They had a direct impact on Benjamin Franklin, on Thomas Jefferson, and others. We all know that we're in one of the most historic basins in the history of North America. The land speculations, size and scope of them, had a direct impact on federalism. They had a direct impact on Alexander Hamilton succeeding in his goal of creating a central bank and monetary policy and these federal level controls that define the American economy. Right here in the Adirondacks is a critical piece of that. I'm not here to talk about it tonight, but it happened. Victory in the War of 1812, same thing, this basin's very important. This one would be a whole nother lecture. Did you know the Erie Canal was designed by Adirondackers? Did you know the Erie Canal was designed by Adirondack surveyors and they were able to do it because they surveyed this part? The guy who ran the entire project, Benjamin Wright, who's to this day known as the father of American civil engineering, was an Adirondack surveyor. So, huge. Iron mining, we led the nation for a time. Our innovations, the innovations that occurred in the Adirondack frontier changed the way iron was mined. Same thing with logging. Innovations in sawmills, innovations the way logs were cut and managed happened here. Social, cultural, lots of things. I hope some of you know about Timbuktu and John Brown, but there is a huge effort here in this region to guarantee voting rights for Blacks in America before the Civil War. A huge impact from women's suffrage that you can learn about. Obviously, the whole idea of vacations and the development of an idea of wilderness ethic, which is very valuable. And then the two things we're here for tonight. It's because of what happened in the Adirondacks, as we'll see shortly, that commercial electromagnetism first gained a foothold and it changed everything. In particular, and this is where my thesis goes, but in the Adirondacks and connected to the Adirondacks, changed the relationship between science and technology. In the modern world, we don't really think about that because all of our technological devices, all based on science. I mean, this is quantum physics here, it wouldn't work at all, right? But before the electromagnetic stuff that I'm going to talk about, almost all technological advances that led to the Industrial Revolution, they didn't come from science. Didn't even know what fundamental forces were involved or how they work. That started to change right in the United States, and what happened in the Adirondacks had an influence on that. So America really blended science and technology, and that changed everything. So that's a pretty good list for a place that's untrammeled. And it's all true, more or less. So let's get into some details on the one topic. 4 people who really did change the world. And I will talk about all of them. So first of all, let's look at where we are in 1800. This is when all of these changes occur, these developments, these discoveries, and they happen very fast, ladies and gentlemen. So we know something about magnetism. We know a little bit about electricity, but we really don't know what to do with it. We use magnetic force without really understanding it for some practical things, but that's it. And then within 30 years, ladies and gentlemen, there are 3 discoveries that change everything, and I already talked about them a little bit before. First of all, batteries are invented. Alessandro Volta, Italian physicist, develops a way to store energy and produce electricity in an effective way. Although a long way to go to power a car. And then what I already talked about, electricity can create magnetic force and the other way. That's within 30 years, those discoveries are made, and they involve understanding a fundamental force. It's an unbelievable difference to what happened before. Take gravity, which is another fundamental force. Throughout thousands of years of history, we've used gravity, we've tried to overcome gravity, we've negotiated with gravity. But in 1800, nobody had any idea what the heck it was, right? There was no understanding of a fundamental force. Same thing with electricity and magnetism. Mysterious, interesting, otherworldly, invisible force. In 30 years, we get it. It's really quite astonishing. So here's the standard narrative. This is the one you learn if you went to school and studied this at all. It's a bridge. So Volta developed a battery. This is really important. Hans Christian Ørsted, Norwegian physicist, experimenter, he would have said, makes that discovery that electromagnetic field.
You wanna do it, Pete?
And we'll admit the rest of it. Beautifully done. Thank you, hello, and welcome to everybody joining. In the middle, so I can't catch up. Sturgeon creates a primitive electromagnet by wrapping wire, and then these two at the bottom are gigantic. So Faraday, who's maybe arguably the greatest scientist of the 19th century, he's up there, discovers magnetic induction, and then the telegraph changes the world. But this standard narrative leaves a few things out. So here's why it happens. A farmer from Vermont, and he has a guy named Timothy Taft, who's a partner of his. He's been speculating, he's been buying land, getting farmed or cleared, he's gonna do some logging. But then a teenage boy, wandering through the woods west of where current Penfield is, discovers iron ore and reports it to him. They verify it, and he says, okay, that's it, I'm moving. So he comes to, crosses the Champlain, Lake Champlain, and he creates a settlement, which is today's Penfield Homestead and Ironville. He first calls it Ironville. Then there's this young guy, he's a math teacher like me, probably better, named Joseph Henry, who's at Albany Academy. And he's playing with magnetism. He's read about some of this stuff going on in Europe. He's fascinated. And lo and behold, he learns that these guys are mining iron, and the iron they're mining is magnetic. It's magnetite. So he's really excited about that. So he gets iron ore from the Adirondacks, and he starts building electromagnets. Penfield is supplying iron to Henry and has an epiphany. I gotta separate iron ore from all the slag and stuff, and I did it washing it with water, and there's trays, and it's awkward. And I've been using magnets to try to pull it out, and they don't work very well. But if Henry built me something that could make magnetism like that and more powerfully, I can make like an iron separator. And Henry says yes, he could. So he builds one, and the rest is history. Then there's this blacksmith. Anybody know who Thomas Davenport is? Oh, this story is really good. He's a blacksmith in Vermont. He's got a little shop in Brandon, which is not too far from Middlebury. And he is a tinkerer. He hears about this amazing device that can lift things invisibly, and he decides he has to go visit it. And that changes a whole lot. So here's the actual narrative that includes the Adirondacks. Sturgeon played with electromagnets, but they stopped working quickly. The magnetic field collapsed. It's quantum physics, let it go, but it didn't work right. And we figured out he can insulate the wires. The field won't collapse. So he made much more long-lasting electromagnets, but more importantly, far more powerful. He builds electromagnets that can lift 50 or 75 times their own weight. So he's pushing the envelope, and in doing that, and I have a slide on it, in doing that, Henry discovers the underlying theory. He figures out why this works the way it does. So he's not just inventing, he's developing the theory. Faraday discovers induction. Oh, but so does Henry independently. And a lesson that I wish we paid more attention to today, they correspond. They share everything. Neither one patents any of it, or for that matter, any of their later discoveries or inventions. No patents. They believe that they could share this for the benefit of humankind. And Henry eventually goes overseas to meet Faraday, and they get along famously. But Henry actually developed induction and then self-induction, which is another step ahead of anybody. So the SI unit of induction is the Henry, named after Joseph Henry. Nobody knows who he is, which drives me crazy. So Henry and Penfield talk about the logistics of like, what's gonna allow us to pull ore from slag more effectively, and Henry says, I know exactly how to build an electromagnetic to power your points. So he builds an electromagnet, the first commercial use of fundamental force under control. The first commercial industrial use of a fundamental force we now control in history happened in the Adirondacks. Penfield, by the way, is 25-30 miles that way. To go see it if you haven't, some of you raised your hands. It's an amazing place. So it's successful more or less. Penfield uses it for many years, and back in the side of the homestead down by the outlet of Penfield Pond, the ruins are still there of the stonework where this was actually housed. So he uses it for quite some time. Doesn't scale up really well, it's awkward. But Henry's, the results of Henry are much different. So Morse develops the telegraph. No, he doesn't. That was invented by Joseph Henry using Adirondack iron. The transformer, Joseph Henry invented the transformer using Adirondack iron. Transformer is critically important. It uses magnetic induction. It allows us to play with voltage so we can now move things great distances and then step it down so it won't electrocute us. It allows the grid, the extended world of electricity. Davenport, that's that blacksmith. He hears about this, as I said, he buys one and disassembles it, see how this works. Davenport, and by the way, ladies and gentlemen, she didn't make the history books, at least not until recently, but Davenport's wife, Emily, is one smart person. She is an equal player in this. So he disassembles this, and he can't figure out how to get it working right again, but he does see what Henry had seen, and some people have talked about, that when he's creating this magnetic field, some of the stuff that he's got, some of the wires he's got one spin. So he's thinking this through. So Emily, first of all, says, well, I think you have electricity and magnetism interacting here and here and here. It's a big mess. This has to be better insulated. Here's my wedding dress. Silk is a great insulator. I'm going to wrap all your wires in silk. Let's see if that does the trick it does. She also figures out some things about the rotation. They develop and build the first electric motor. And there are some other things that are called electric motors. In Europe, they were developed, but they moved things back and forth. This was with the commutator. Obviously, that Adirondack iron and what it did for Thomas Davenport changed the world, along with the telegraph. It's Davenport in 1835 built an electric car. So his idea is, he doesn't know nothing about how batteries could be useful, but if you had a rail and you charged it, well, now you can supply power to that thing. So I don't know yet whether Davenport used the term streetcar, but that's what he was doing. Well, I'll lay out a rail, run electricity through it, and we have these beautiful motors we can move all over the place. He demonstrates it to the federal government. The streetcar eventually catches on, but not in time for Davenport. Batteries really hold him back. But these inventions obviously are fundamental changes, and everybody in Europe is going crazy over this, right? Morse is an interesting guy. He's a portrait painter. He's not a scientist, didn't have any interest in science at all. He's kind of a curious fellow, and he read about some of these electromagnetic developments. And he thought to himself, but Joseph Henry beat him by a decade in thinking, gosh, if I can send electric current from here to there instantaneously, maybe that's the way I could send a message. Joseph Henry's way to do it, but was to use wire to ring a bell over a mile of wire. Now this is an unbelievable change. Telegraphs existed for centuries, but not electric. Semaphore, smoke signals, they were used in Europe in war extensively, but great limitations, obviously. All of a sudden now we can move something over a wire instantaneously. Morse gets the idea to really do something with that, commercialize it. And in so doing, he changes everything, of course. But he didn't know the science, so Henry gave it to him. Didn't patent it. Okay, so just briefly, what happened, including in the Adirondacks, where people are pushing in this frontier to try to do things in a different way, really did change the world. As I mentioned earlier, in history, the scientific and industrial revolutions are very much separate. They're both incredibly important, but the way that science affects technology doesn't really exist until this change happens, primarily in America, right? The Industrial Revolution is tinkers, steam engine, James Watt, a tinker inventor. He didn't understand exactly why it worked. In his own words, he didn't understand exactly why it worked. The same thing about improvements in machinery, the same thing about improvements in iron ore mining. It's the electromagnetic revolution that changed everything. So, and it's because in America, there wasn't this schism between the great upper high Enlightenment thinkers and the people down down in their basements messing around with stuff. It was all mixed together. We didn't have those types of structures in our culture yet. Benjamin Franklin was a brilliant scientist. He also invented all kinds of stuff because he tinkered. Henry was like that. And Henry is probably the finest example of that because of the impact he had. So his magnet, and this is something that's really exciting in my research because I'm getting at these primary sources. This electromagnet in the Adirondacks in Penfield, 25 miles away, that traveled all over the place. All the European scientists knew of it, and they immediately were like trying to figure out how they can do something with that much strength. And the fact that it was actually useful in a way also spurred people. So this relationship between science and technology, that was a focal point in the development of industry and the development of modern society, of communication. And a lot of it is connected directly to the Adirondack frontier. So, I love this quote. This is a historian at the University of Albany. He's maybe the preeminent expert on the development of the telegraph. And that kind of sums it up. So, if you haven't been to Penfield, it is a wonderful homestead. First of all, it's kind of amazing. The whole town looks right out of the 19th century. All the houses are painted white with picket fences. Doesn't look phony at all. It's like people. But they honor Joseph Henry and what he did. They have this magnet. It is an exact duplicate of one of the originals because he built the few. It's a duplicate because Joseph Henry was the sort of secretary of the Smithsonian, one of the organizers of the Smithsonian, and that's what the Smithsonian. But I highly urge you to go see it. What does it have to do with living lands? I'll just say this, ladies and gentlemen. I have found when we have a more realistic view of what happened here and why it was important and how it was important and how it wasn't just about untrammeled primeval wilderness, but about people throughout millennia, right? From Native American forward, struggling with a frontier that, as we all know, even today, is rife with challenges. It's not an easy place to live. But this is only one example of many. People pushed, people tried things, people innovated. And so I think the idea of living lands is exactly right. They've always been living lands, not just fauna and flora, but human life. And when we tell that story, then things like wilderness preservation, which is something I do as an activist, becomes more valuable. It becomes a more real thing. It becomes a sense that we can recover something important about nature. And we're better at that if we understand all that happened here, including a remarkable synthesis of science, technology, and people pushing to do something better. Briefly, Henry is not a household name. How many people knew the name Joseph Henry before I started talking? Look at this last one. He's that low, right? We don't know about it. All of this. And he loved the Adirondacks. Davenport, not so lucky, he was defeated by batteries. So his personal life, there two biographies, one by a relative. The other one I haven't read yet. It's a pretty sad story. He really believed in what he'd done, but he couldn't get traction. But it just wasn't feasible. So, that's my story. Thank you. I'm very glad to have your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions you might have. And if I don't know the answer, I'll say so. Yes, sir.
What was, maybe you said this, I missed it, what was Henry's training background? Was he an engineer, or did he have technical training, or was it just all seat of the pants?
No, so that's an interesting question. And it might be related in interesting ways. He had a tough family life early on. He was sent to Europe. In Europe, the people they lived with were involved in the theater. He became absolutely fascinated with the theater. So he was on track to be an actor. And what he was fascinated with in theater was imagining things that were supernatural, you know, fairies and whatnot. And apparently he was a good actor. He got good reviews. But he was fascinated with creating these mystical, supernatural kinds of things. He came back to the United States and was invited to enter Albee Academy, which had been formed just a few years before, very prestigious. And it was all about Americanizing science. And one of the professors there gave him a book on chemistry, which, if you think about it, chemical reactions are kind of magical. He was fascinated. So he read the book cover to cover. And as he was digesting chemistry, I have his seen his as a primary source of his letter to a friend where he said, well, then with that, and this is even more supernatural and fascinating. I'm going to try this. So as he was learning about that, mathematics, the important in it, mathematics was often treated as like a separate thing, sort of ethereal over here. But Henry saw how mathematics was important in chemistry. He also took a job and he saw how mathematics was important in surveying. So he went all in on mathematics and became an expert. He was a polymath. So he was a mathematician first, but then he got into electromagnetism and made all these. He was a polymath. He's an incredible guy. So there you go. Other questions? Yes, sir.
A couple of years ago, I was visiting relatives in Galway, and I remember going by a sign, Galway, New York, in the foothills of the Adirondacks. And I remember seeing a sign, and it mentioned Joseph Henry. I couldn't get my wife to stop for the whole darn sign, but I remember that something about Joseph Henry in Galway, New York. Do you have any? Did he do something special there?
Is that on the southwestern edge of the park? I can only speculate. Henry's surveying job that had a huge impact on him was laying out a road that went from the Rome Utica area toward Rochester. So that, and what he did on that road was actually important. It may be that was memorial.
Okay, yeah, it's about
Otherwise-
40 miles north of Schenectady,
Yeah,
and Scotia, so.
yeah, I couldn't say for sure.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay.
Other questions? If not, thank you. Very much. You want to drive my car, go ahead.
Where are you going?
This is. I'm not sure that I'm very excited about it. This is what I wanted to do. They're doing.
In summertime, I go about 60 miles. I mean, 250 to 270.